Every passionate follower of Jesus has a deep desire to share their faith with others. How do we make and multiply disciples around the block and around the world? How do we do it at a rate that can compete with population growth, a growing secular culture, and 40% of the world considered completely unreached? With hosts Doug Lucas of Team Expansion, Lee Wood of One Body Church, John Hirima of Big Life, Roger Shull of E3 Partners, and special guests from around the world, we'll explore how believers can come together to make more disciples. Welcome to the More Disciples podcast.
All right, welcome again to another exciting episode of the More Disciples podcast. I am Roger Shull, one of the hosts here, along with my co-hosts, Doug Lucas.
How do you know it's going to be exciting? Hi, Roger.
Well, it's because of the guests that we're getting to, but before we get to the guest, our other co-host is Lee Wood.
Hey, everybody.
And John Hirima.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, and the reason I'm excited is because we're talking to our guest, Dori, today. She's coming, talking to us from San Francisco, California, a very hard-to-reach location, but God is doing a work through her. And so I'm excited just to learn from her. This is my first time meeting her, but Lee has met her before. So Lee, why don't you introduce Dori to us?
Yeah, so we know we've passed from death to life because we love one another. She's my sister, my fellow elder, co-laborer, I believe gifted apostolically like a Junia in the Bible, and she's visited Tampa with some of her disciples numerous times. So we're connecting across geography. We're connected together, obviously because of Jesus from here to there. And Roger, actually, it's kind of cool because somebody that you do know has moved from Memphis to San Francisco, Zach Medlock, to labor there with Dori as part of movement DMM CPM there. So she has a special place in my heart, and also is laboring in the region of, I guess, San Francisco would be northwest as part of 2414 as well, because we've regionalized that in the United States. And so she's leading that same way from micro to macro as part of the 2414 Coalition for the United States. And I'm super stoked to see you, Dori.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I didn't know that Zach was working with you. I knew he had just moved out to San Francisco, but I think that's awesome. So Dori, why don't you introduce yourself to us? Maybe you could share just how you got involved in disciple making and church planting movements, and what is God doing right now? So maybe you can kind of give us a little bit of your story.
I started doing DMM probably 2 years, about like a little more than 2 years ago. Before that, I was actually a church planner, and I planted a church in UC Berkeley. Started out with just, gathering college students, and then eventually evolved into a church, and, eventually become like a couple of congregation, different language groups maybe. And I just feel like God is calling us to do, to reach out to, more people. No matter how hard I try, I won't be able to pack everybody in the building. And I've been searching, a lot about like how to multiply. Went to different conferences and eventually met Curtis. He came and trained us, and it was just really rocked my world. I actually was looking for church planting strategies, and he kept talking about disciple making, and that drives me nuts, but at the same time, I realized that's actually very important, kind of lead me back to reading Matthew 28 that says, go and make disciples of all nations. I'm like, how did I miss that? Apparently it didn't say like plant churches, all nations, because if you start making disciples, churches will come. Well, I went home, prayed, and God spoke to me and he told me, Dori, you've been trying to grow ministry, grow programs, grow everything. Have you ever tried growing people? And I realized, oops, Lord, I'm sorry. I didn't do that. I don't know what it is. I repent. Show me how. And that's how I got started with disciple making.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, just talking with Zach a little bit of actually Brett Butler. I'm sure you might be connected to. I know Zach is in San Francisco. Is just the area that you're working in is so difficult to reach. It's one of the least reached areas of the country. So I'd love to hear, like, now that you've met these people, like what is God doing now? Like, what are you pursuing now in San Francisco?
We're for sure, like, making disciples, and training them to actually start a new groups, new churches in different parts of the Bay. As much as I wanted to limit, from one area to the other, another, God is basically just doing his work, like I can't control it. But at the same time, I'm super excited to see, that, we're trying to reach way beyond the Bay Area, reaching out to Fresno and other places, and even like, outside of California, like Georgia and even Mexico. That's another story that I need to tell later. But there's also something that, is really dear to me. God has placed the Muslims in my heart. In fact, there's a mosque like near where I live. I've been doing prayer walking and eventually get to meet, Muslims from different regions. And I've been, spending time with them, reaching out to them. I've been meeting up with like Turkish people, Palestinians, Yemeni people, and I get to share the gospel with them. And just do life with them, and that's super exciting to see.
Yeah, Dori, there's so much inside that answer, so many different directions I could go, but I know about one of them because I saw a 2414 regional call that one of your disciples was on. I got to watch the recording. The guy, I think his name is John, that you reached him, led him to Jesus, and there's already attempts at generational growth from that. So could you just tell that story of John and engaging him during prayer walking? Can you just tell that story?
Well, actually, John is not my disciple. John is actually my disciple's disciple. So, I've been training Henry and Charles for about a year. So they have a heart for, like, the homeless people, and people who are really in need. So they're just spending time, like, reaching out and passing out food and bread and stuff like that to the homeless encampment near where they live. John was actually, I don't even know if you want to call him a homeless, because he used to have like a family at home, but he just wanted to move out to live in that area in his RV. He bought his RV, so they approached John and started doing like this, just the three thirds with John. And they did it for a couple of weeks, over at the encampment. John was a little open, and he would invite people to his RV and, hey, come on over, read some word, God. And then one day he disappeared, and Henry and Charles was so, anxious to, kind of try to look for him, and then eventually realized that he's actually in the county jail. So we ended up like helping him to look up, the names, and they reach out to John to basically to visit him. John didn't know like who would, be there for him, because he thought, maybe a sister, but no one wants to talk to him anymore in his family. So that's kind of weird. Somebody would visit me. And turns out it was just a whole bunch of strangers. In fact, Henry and Charles aren't even fluent in English. Sometimes John would be like, what are you saying? But they kind of push forward anyway, like, because I guess they're compelled by the love of Christ, to do something like that. Different culture, different background, who cares, right? So they actually reached out to John, and John was in tears, seeing how much, God loved him. He was a little angry at God during that time, but he realized God loved him because of, what these people did to him. So he has been sober for, 14 months. They bailed him out. He actually moved to Fresno and have been since, making disciples. John started his own church And recently, there's a little turn of events. Recently, that he just went back to the courts, and to kind of try to get everything taken care of. And like he was actually assuming that the judge would, let him go do the house arrest. That's it, because he has been doing house arrest anyway. But the judge actually wanted him to go back to jail for 45 days, and he was devastated. But at the same time, eventually realized that God is sending him to make disciples, wherever he's at, including to be in the jail. So we went and prayed for him and sent him out as a missionary this last week.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Hey, Dori, it's great to meet you, because I've heard a lot about you. And by the way, you got a very cool webpage too. So you give that address sometime during this broadcast. But I love the way that you are modeling this in the San Francisco area. We always tell people that it works in the hardest areas in the world, and then we get to the States and people say, well, it's hard here. And now we have a model in probably the most difficult place in the States that we see the Lord moving in ways that we don't understand. But could you just share a couple of the hurdles you had to address working in that type of the world? And also, is it easier working with people from other cultures or people who are found their own dependency themselves here in the States?
I don't know if it's easier or harder, but for sure, one of the difficulties here is that, I know with a lot of the movements that I learned from in the States, they're gathering people kind of, like similar backgrounds, or maybe, culture, or, skin tone, whatever. And I'm not sure if it's easier, or maybe some people actually gather, people with, maybe they're exposed to Christianity, in their lives, something like that. So here we have people from literally all over the world, like for example, I was with Henry yesterday that, I think their neighbors are from Iran. I have a lot of Yemeni people here, and I try to speak to them in Arabic. And the next thing I know, I'm actually talking to, a Turkish woman who doesn't speak Arabic, speak Turkish. And then the way, we gather people and do church, it's I wish I could gather a lot more and then send them out and do the same. But there are a lot of different cultures and background, even language groups that we need to, kind of consider. So I think, what I need in a way, what we need is more person of peace, to reach out to different cultures and, or backgrounds.
Okay, and what about working with true Californians? Are they receptive?
Not at all. Well, depending on depending on which area you're talking about, because I think Southern California is a little more open, with people that are more receptive to Christianity. Here we have the woke people, I guess, and then we gotta be culturally sensitive. We gotta be careful what we say. Kind of thing. Yeah. So it's just very different. People protest. About everything. I just learned yesterday. There's a San Francisco ice cream shop. Somebody was protesting. The person is making Asian flavors when they're actually white, and I'm like, I protest about that. Thai tea ice cream. What's wrong with that? But anyway, so we have people like that here.
Yep. I hear you saying that, the Dori, someone with my sensitivities would be someone that would be helpful in your context. Yeah, I'm joking.
Yeah, I was just re-listening to the podcast that we just released with Troy Cooper, who's in Southern California, and he said moving from Florida to Southern California was at least in Florida, people would say yes to Jesus. They might, discipleship might be hard, but at least they'll say yes. But they were nothing for 2 years, anyone saying yes to Jesus, and just recently having that. So if you're saying where you're at in California is harder than that, and that must be pretty hard soil. But yeah, trusting that the Lord will do a work there. Though.
I don't know if you caught it, Doug, but actually Dori's heart for Muslims. She's actually learning that language to be able to for access.
That's tremendous.
That's pretty cool.
That's tremendous. And Dori, as you know, we've conversed a couple of times because of an event that you're going to speak out with our org, and we're excited about that. But as I was thinking about your life, I keep thinking back here to Acts chapter 11. I've got it open here in my Bible, and it's talking about Paul being in Philippi, and on the Sabbath, he went out to the city gate that was beside the river, and for some reason they expected to find a place of prayer there. They sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there, and one of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. So she must have been an effective businesswoman, as you know, and she was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. And when she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. And she says, if you consider me a believer in the Lord, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. She was evidently a great businesswoman and very persuasive. You kind of remind me of Lydia because you're kind of anchoring a particular part of the kingdom that we really need you to anchor. And I think that's awesome. Would you talk about for you personally what have been some of the personal hurdles you've had? And the one that I think you could start with, didn't you have to decide what to do with your building when you were working with a church? I can't remember if you told me once, didn't you tell me that you just sort of, in a way, you gave it away and you kind of started this whole thing over from scratch?
Oh yeah, that was hard. We actually started a church now it was more than 7 years ago, probably 8 years ago. And we started out from, just gathering people, on college campus, and eventually evolved into, we basically rent a place near campus. And God has been good to us, but I always know that place is temporary. I just didn't know what's next. Maybe we'll move into a bigger place. Maybe we'll buy, a place for millions of dollars or something. But when by the time when I get to meet Curtis, I was really struggling because what he offered, is just great, making disciples making disciples, not all on one person, not all on me anymore. But at the same time, what it means is, that everything will be different. I'm not even sure if we should continue to, rent that space and kind of what to do with it. After Curtis's visit, I gathered, all the leaders. We prayed, and we basically have to refine our vision, from the beginning. And what we conclude is that we need to focus on, making disciples until all nations worship. We need to focus on missional living, gathering and scattering, and healthy multiplication, intentional disciple making. Intentional, not only just making disciples, but a lot of people are claiming to make disciples, but they're like, yeah, it's going to take forever. It's going to take a lifetime, True. But we need to intentionally help them to be disciple makers. That's a different story. That's what we were focusing on. And because of that, we decided that, hey, do we need this building anymore in that case? If we were going to decentralize, maybe not. It took me a year to, slowly deliver this message, through different, maybe the pulpit, talking to people, meeting in fellowship. I thought it went well, tried to infuse the 3/3 idea to the groups, but eventually a lot of leaders, they didn't really tell me that they didn't want to do it, but it's basically they just didn't want to do it. We didn't sign up for this, right? We signed up for whatever, the church that, the way we've been doing it, the attractional model, gathering people, big worship, do we have a smoke machine? Maybe we do. Slowly, people started to leave. And we're in the transition time. I know it is good, but at the same time, I know these people are leaving. And Lord, you promised something good, but what I'm seeing is people leaving. And what I'm seeing in the future is unknown. That's not cool. God, what are you doing? But I think, what God is doing in me is like, Dori, are you building your own kingdom or are you talking about my kingdom? Because if it's my kingdom, let me do it my way. And that was hard to really, seeing people leave. And I still think it's worth it, that we're able to walk out of that place and start over from scratch, because most
So
people are.
I think we'll go back to Roger, but I think during some of that time is where we got to walk with one another a little bit, Dori, like was during that transition where, I was getting phone calls, and other people. So we need one another, right?
Mhm.
Like San Francisco's far from Tampa, and it's far from Indy, and it's far from Memphis, and it's far from from Curtis. But we need nobody's alone. This is why this part is important. We need one another. No one's got all of it together. So we need you. We thank you for your courage, okay? Because we're sharpened by your obedience to our King Jesus. So very grateful for that.
Yeah, it was during that time, that yes, we're moving out from that place. We're getting into the unknown. But Lee, tell me, what is it going to be like? Where's the promised land? What does it look like? Describe to me. I need to see it to believe it. But Lee was like, don't worry about it. Keep doing what you're doing. You get better at it. I'm like, no, that's not what I wanted to hear.
Oh, man. Well, I think what you're talking about, I mean, just in our previous podcast, we had a similar story of from Nick Toomey talking to us about how he had his church that he started and kind of difficulty of needing to leave that to pursue decentralized disciple-making movement. And even Neil Karsten talking to us about counting the costs of this, but it being worth it. And so I think what you're talking about is something that probably a lot of people pursuing movements can relate to. And even it will be helpful as people think through starting to pursue movements, just to kind of how to be prepared for what God's going to do, and maybe even some pruning as well. But I want to go back to something that you were talking about earlier. I likely said, you say things and they can go a million different directions because I have so many questions because you're saying so many good things. I want to go back to you saying you're reaching out to all these different people. So you said Yemenis, Turkish, I don't even remember all of them. Like with trying to pursue movements amongst all these different peoples, like have you had to adapt anything towards that? I know contextualization is talked about a lot, but like how have you done that? Or is it like, no, you just keep on doing the same thing and it works just because the principles are from the word? Like how have you walk that out in these different cultures and different environments?
Well, I still do the prayer walking, and I still, I look for the person of peace. And that is the same. But I'm a lot more intentional to kind of, look at the map, learn from websites, and then even like going into the neighborhoods where they're at, like try to basically like know where these people hang out. I have to wish, to like shop at different places. I used to shop at the big box stores, and now I'm intentionally looking for like neighborhood groceries, ethnic groceries, if you will. I don't like to use that word, but you know what I mean. And to, just shop there and start, like, for example, there is a Hispanic grocery near me, about like a minute or two, from our home. I thought I was going to go there to practice my Spanish, I guess, but which is really bad. But it turns out like I heard Arabic, and I realized that basically the owner is a Yemeni guy, and everybody works there, are Yemeni people. That's how I learned, and eventually that's how I get connected with people. So the basic principles are the same, but, you got to have to do something extra in order to intentionally look for them. They won't just come to your door.
Right. And you said you're learning Arabic for the sake of reaching out to these people, and Spanish. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, I learned Spanish, growing up, but it never really clicked. So I thought I was going to do that. And it turns out, I need to learn Arabic as well. So.
Well, that's awesome.
Hey, Dori, in your process of going through this journey, and you mentioned that Lee kept on telling you to keep doing it because you'll get better at it. At what point did you realize that, hey, you know what, this is actually working? This is the Lord's plan for my life, and you knew it was a go?
When I see my disciples actually making disciples, or at least trying, when their vision, it's from God and not from me anymore. Because I've been leading
Amen.
the church and realizing, that whatever the vision that I've given to them, or maybe I thought it was a we vision, and turns out it was like a Dori vision, kind of, forced into other people. You can only go so far with that, right? Oh yeah, we got it, let's go. But you'll drag people along, they'll be tired. But if their vision is actually from God, they don't need me anymore. And I just love the fact that they actually don't need me anymore.
Wow. You know what
That's awesome.
strikes me about you, Dori, is that even though you are in the process of building these generations, and so it's clear that you are working with like first generation people who are already at work starting other stuff. What strikes me about you is you keep doing prayer walking, and I don't want to embarrass you or anything, but can you just kind of describe what your daily schedule is like? And again, I'm not trying to embarrass you, so right now you have permission to just be yourself and say, what is a daily typical schedule like for you? And I'm particularly interested in hearing about your prayer walking, because if I remember, it's really strong.
I get up in the morning to pray for 2 hours, just being alone with God, and then sometimes I'll call people and have a couple meetings, and then I go out to do prayer walking. I try to do it every day, sometimes with some of my disciples, and we'll walk the neighborhood, and because I'm intentionally reaching out to the Muslims, I would focus on walking their neighborhoods. And usually in the evening I pretty much have a group every night. So usually online, sometimes I have to be there. Actually, I prefer to be in person. So because most people will actually work during the day. So our gatherings, our simple churches are usually in the evenings.
Wow. It's a pretty strong schedule, Dori. And I think probably part of what you're seeing in results is a result of that. Lee has told us a lot about some of the people that you're working with. And he has told us about, in particular, a young girl named Amber. Do you mind? Can you tell us something about Amber?
Amber, even though Amber is really, different from me, I see a lot of, good qualities. She's just a goer, she's obedient. She's younger, of course, and hopefully God will use her greatly in the future. But actually, she's already like doing a lot, with her own disciples, casting vision, to them, and I think a couple of her disciples are reaching out to their coworkers, that are different cultures, Indians, Nepalis, so it's just really excited to see. Yeah, she actually came from a legacy church and really struggled because she felt the call of God. But I guess, the church, is basically just wait, and sometimes, honestly, I don't want to get into this gender topic too much, but sometimes when a woman felt called, they're like, people are like, okay, what are you going to do? Like, maybe God is calling you to children ministry. We'll see if we can find a place for it. So she's really struggling, when she felt God's call and didn't know where to fit into that, in the couple positions that they have. So by the time when she realized she can just be free and let God call her, to do whatever God is calling her to do. I'm just seeing, a person grow, into the likeness of Christ, and she just blossom. So that's good.
That's awesome.
That's awesome to hear. How you've been with her. Yeah, I think about Paul saying in Philippians 4, like, to greet Yodia and Syntyche. I have no idea if that's how you pronounce it, but he was like, these women are fellow workers with me in the truth. And so definitely appreciate that. I think it's true. I think like I've even, heard even guys, saying we want to go into ministry, like, oh, you want to be a pastor? And they're like, well, no, I don't really want to be a pastor. Like, oh, you want to be a worship leader then? And it's like there is sometimes like a little bit of a limiting factor in the way we can think, but just it's so freeing when we see Jesus says like, hey, everyone can go make disciples, and it's really awesome to hear how Amber was doing that. But before time runs out, I want to ask something. You said, "Oh, I'll tell this story. Tell the story later." And immediately I was like, "It must be good." You said that your church has jumped to different places like Georgia, I think you said, and some other places. But you said it jumped to Mexico, just the multiplication. And you said, "Oh, I got to tell that story later." I want to hear that story. What happened? How did the fruit jump from where you're at all the way to Mexico? That's awesome.
So I think big life, right? Big life. They actually encouraged me to help out in one of the trainings, like online training during the pandemic, and they basically had a Winter Jam list of people, the people who attended Winter Jam. We get a chance to disciple them for a day, and I did that for 2 times. On the second time, I found a woman in Georgia and another woman in North Carolina. So I did the trainings of, my story, God's story, that kind of thing. And I invited them, hey, would you like to continue to do this, this discipleship training? And they said, of course, So we started doing a disciple training on a regular basis, every week. And one of the ladies are actually, she's Mexican. She's from Georgia. She's from Mexico, but then eventually moved to Georgia. And she just started, reaching out to all her friends and sharing and training others. She started a couple groups, one in, one in New Jersey, one in Illinois. And then she was like, wow, this is actually working. Let me actually go share with my family too. So she traveled back to Mexico last year, and she shared the gospel with her family, and they came to Christ. And recently she felt God's call to go back to Mexico just to baptize her family.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa, that's really cool. I want to be there. So I wanted to, kind of join her. And I know she's a little, hesitating because, she wasn't sure if it's safe for me or, others who look a little like foreign, to go there where she's at, where she's at is quite, a dangerous place. And I talked to Lee, and Lee was like, well, just wait. I don't like to hear the word wait. I like to hear the word go. And when he says wait, I think he really mean it, and it was God was speaking to me, Dori, you would get to go. But for now, wait and let people, kind of respond to God's call, and set them free. But sometimes, you can hinder, when you're there. You hinder the work of God. But anyway.
So I just want you to think about that. So that San Francisco crossing over geographical, organizational, in a virtual space, obedience to other states and other nations, just with one another. Like, it's a beautiful picture. And Jesus gives the increase. And one thing I really like about Dori, she's doing it, but I'll quote the Bible verse, that the communication of your faith may become effectual by acknowledging every good thing that is in you in Christ Jesus. That's what she's modeling. That's what she's passing on. And Jesus gives the increase.
Amen.
That's awesome.
Amen.
That's awesome.
Dori, thanks for that story about the training online during COVID, because people are always looking for excuses not to do something, and that was a big one. So it's exciting to hear results when you continue to persevere. So for somebody listening to this podcast right now, they're trying to figure out, what's my first step? What would you tell them to do?
Good question.
To make a disciple. Yeah, to just obey, go out and share. So looking for that person of peace. I guess some of the people who are listening, might be, in the same background or, had the similar experience as I do, probably have a church that we need to care for, a congregation, the people that we need to look after, and they might not think the same way. So how do we change people's mind, and turn the big ship in a different direction? I wish I can do that. But I didn't start with that. I actually started with a few of the people who are actually willing. And this is always the way to actually start a movement, right? To really find a faithful few, and to really, change the world. That's what Jesus did. That's what we should do.
Amen.
Cool.
Awesome. I think when we had Austin and Lindsay Wilson on the podcast and we asked a similar question, Lindsay had almost the same exact comment. She was like, what was the first step? Just do it. Just go do it. Obey. That's really great. Well, hey, that, man, I told you this would be an exciting podcast, and it was.
You're
I
right.
heard about multi-ethnic sharing and just passionately prayer walking and hearing, even going from just what you've always known and even making the step of faith and the perseverance needed in that, and even in an environment that's extremely hard soil in the United States. It's supposed to be a Christian country, but there's definitely a lot of pockets that's very much not the case. So Dori, thank you so much. It was good to meet you and good to have you on the podcast. This was really good to learn from you.
Thanks, Dori. Love you.
Very cool. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
How are you making more disciples? What problems have you encountered? What successes have you celebrated? What questions do you have? Share your stories with us by visiting moredisciples.com/contact. If you're looking for next steps on growing your ability to make and multiply disciples, visit moredisciples.com to find resources, tools, and events all designed to help you make more disciples.